I'm on a mission to watch 100 time loop movies, and along the way, I'm sharing my thoughts on the best examples. Movies that do something unique or explore the trope in amazing ways. And today we're talking about Source Code, what I think is an underrated and widely misunderstood movie that people love to complain about. I'm Christopher Bingham, and this is Goodnight Rita. Source Code is a 2011 feature film directed by Duncan Jones and written by Ben Ripley. It stars Jake Gyllenhaal as Colter Stevens, a soldier who wakes up in the body of a commuter on a train headed for Chicago. Before he has a chance to figure out what's happening, the train blows up, and Stevens is sent to a kind of liminal space that looks like a cockpit.
You're with Beleaguered Castle. Are you functional?
Where his only contact is Goodwin, an Air Force captain played by Vera Farmiga, who speaks to him through a screen.
Recall my name.
Goodwin, your name is Goodwin.
That is correct. Welcome back.
We soon learn he's living the last 8 minutes before the train bombing over and over again in order to learn who is responsible. From Goodwin's perspective, the bombing has already happened, and they're trying to prevent a second attack. To achieve this, they use the eponymous source code, a system that connects Stevens to a kind of psychological imprint left by the mind of the man whose body he's inhabiting. As the film progresses, we learn more about Stevens' situation as he works to solve the problem, and he also develops feelings for Christina, the woman sitting opposite him, who, by everyone else's understanding, is already dead. In story DNA terms, it's Quantum Leap meets Groundhog Day. It looks pretty good, with some interesting effects later on. I always am particularly impressed by the representation of Gyllenhaal in the chamber. His performance is top-notch, and while, in my opinion, the music isn't anything to write home about, the overall feel of this movie is strong and consistent. Unfortunately, lots of people talk trash about this movie, and mostly it has to do with the ending. Around the 1 hour mark, the brutal reality of Colter Stevens' situation starts to become clear. We learn that he was shot down in Afghanistan, and the version of him we've been seeing is merely an illusion. What remains of him is a mangled torso, being held on the brink of death in order to perform this task. However, Stevens becomes convinced he can save Christina and everyone on the train, and asks for another chance.
I know, quantum physics, parabolic calculus. You're wrong, Goodwin. You're just plain wrong.
Captain Christina is dead.
Goodwin allows him one last loop, and then removes his life support, thinking that she's granting him a merciful death.
There will be no coming back.
As his final 8 minutes come to a close, Colter kisses Christina, and time freezes. Then, after a cheeky pause, it starts again, and they finally reach their destination. The button at the end of the film sees a different Goodwin, the Goodwin in this world, opening an email he sent from the train, and we pan across to another Colter Stevens, hooked up to source code.
Promise me you'll help him. And when you do me a favor. Tell him everything is gonna be okay.
Now, it's easy to anticipate the kind of complaints people have about this. I'm a sci-fi nerd, I get it. In reviews, you often see phrases like faulty logic, or suggestions that the ending is tacked on, a decision made in a studio boardroom rather than by the creatives as part of their vision. And while, yes, this movie isn't perfect, personally, I think Jeffrey Wright's character is too hammy, and I shudder at the words war on terror, just because post-9/11 critique was everywhere in film and TV at this time, and making the subtext, text like this is horribly unsubtle.
We finally have a powerful weapon now in the war on terror.
But I think the people making complaints about its, quote, flawed logic are missing the point. Something about me is I'm a big rewatcher. No shit. When I find something I like, I often come back to it over the years. It allows me to develop a deeper connection to a piece of media, and I love how, as time goes on, you can look at a story differently or notice new things about it. When I first watched Source Code, I was at university, and I felt a lot like these reviewers. I thought the ending was a magical cop-out that ruined a perfectly good sci-fi. How dare they? How dare these guys trick me like that? Then, years later, when I watched it for a second time as a graduate, something kind of clicked for me. I'd watched a lot more stuff by then, lots more sci-fi, as well as, fantasy sci-fi, things where the edges of the genre kind of bleed a bit. I also kind of have this sense that science fiction in general had grown in that time and was getting more concerned with things like quantum mechanics and multiple worlds. And some of my favorite things were actually stories that blended science with religion and spirituality and ideas of fate. A great example being Battlestar Galactica, which has spaceships and killer robots, but also like gods and ghosts, it's great. So I was now far more willing to engage with a story that used science jargon as a starting point, but tackled more kind of psychedelic, philosophical perspectives. By the time I watched it a third time, I had spent years as a film lecturer, dissecting stories and helping my students understand the deeper drives that should motivate their creative decisions. I also had a lot more experience under my belt, writing and producing things myself, thinking about story and character, and working with performers. And this time around, I let the mechanics and the logic of the story fall away, and just looked at what had been on screen this entire time. I had been thinking of this thing as a movie about a time loop, not as a movie about a soldier. But what's right there on the screen the whole time? What is Jake Gyllenhaal, a gifted actor, spending this entire movie giving us? And how does the blocking and the design of it all reinforce that? We're watching a dying soldier being forced to keep serving his country. He made the ultimate sacrifice, and he is still being asked to serve. He's also being kept in the dark, quite literally, in a dark place, separated from his superiors, who are deliberately not giving him the whole picture. And he follows orders anyway. These codes and lists he memorizes for Goodwin, they're a really interesting element. Ostensibly, we're told they're for, grounding his mind or something and getting him back on track. But maybe they're a method of control, of indoctrination. And the people on the train, they're ignorant, entitled even. They're, wrapped up in their own selfish lives. By comparison, given what we know, their little problems are insignificant. They don't know what he's been through or what he's currently going through, and he keeps trying to save them, even though it is a thankless, anonymous task. And at the end, when he succeeds, no matter how you feel about it, whether you like it or not, whether you think it's real or an illusion or the last neurons firing in his dying brain, what matters is that from Coulter Stevens' perspective, he gets to have what they have.
Look at all this.
Good to see you, ladies. Up this early in the morning.
What?
Michelle, Barack.
All this life.
So, under all that sci-fi stuff, and the time loop, and the mechanics, you reach the emotional center of this story.
He's done enough, Doctor.
And I think it holds a lot of romantic notions about military service, a deep empathy for servicemen and women, and maybe has something to say about the way we treat our veterans. And I don't know about you, but I think that's neat.